The light tank, thought to be a redundant technology of yesteryear, is back. In the age where tanks are judged poorly simply due to a lack of literal invincibility, as was seen when the Russian invasion of Ukraine made people question if tanks had somehow become redundant due to the fact they could be destroyed, as if they had always been some impenetrable fortress. It's understandable why the light tank as a choice in the modern era is a perplexing one to many, with its much thinner armour leaving no secrets about its vulnerabilities. However, it's worth noting in the intricate realm of warfare, a tank's armour alone will not decide the outcome of 1,000 battles. The light tank is still a relevant concept to this day, for reasons which will soon be explained. For those that don't know, a light tank is different from a medium tank or main battle tank, being initially designed for rapid movements in and out of combat, to outmaneuver heavier tanks. It is smaller in size with thinner armour and a less powerful main gun, tailored for better tactical mobility and ease of transport and logistics over armour and firepower. Where the main battle tank becomes a liability, the light tank becomes a valuable asset. Thick armoured heavy vehicles simply can't go everywhere. They get stuck, they're hard to ship around the world, and they're slow, and simply present a number of weaknesses that a light variant can avoid. While medium tanks aren't going to be replaced wholesale by light tanks, it's clear that they each have their roles even today. The light tank is not a new concept, and has been around for quite some time, dating back to many of the tanks present in the First World War. The definition itself has grown clarity as time has passed, and while many tanks could be considered light tanks, the variant really became a clear defined model in the Second World War. In this time, the war would spread to the arid deserts of North Africa, the jungles of the Pacific and the plains of Europe. Almost every type of terrain saw conflict, and tanks were present in all of them. In this process, it was found that different tanks fit different theatres of conflict, and while medium tanks could generally fit most of these roles, when the terrain became unsuitable for these larger tanks or the logistical strain of supplying and moving them grew too high, light tanks were found to be a valuable alternative that could provide needed fire support to infantry units in these areas. In the early blitzkrieg phase of the Second World War, German tanks, light tanks, showed their mobility was a lethal attribute, able to often outmaneuver the larger tanks that outgunned them. Light tanks would be maintained by many militaries long after the Second World War. One well-known example of this is the M551 Sheridan, which was sometimes found to be a useful asset in Vietnam, where the harsh terrain made the less mobile M48 patterns ill-suited for many operations. The Sheridan in these instances, however, would shine by providing required fire support for infantry units where the pattern could not reach. However, the trade-off was that shoulder-fired launchers could be used to much greater effect against these lighter armoured tanks. But to the infantry on the ground, a light tank was still a greater support asset than no tank at all. And sometimes the only tank that could be available would be such light mobile vehicles like the Sheridan. It is these attributes that best encapsulate the use of a light tank. When thick armour and heavy firepower of a medium tank become negated by issues of mobility and logistics, it is to the little light tanks that can whom generals look towards. Main battle tanks are perfectly suited to the vast flatlands and moderate hills, such as Europe, but when the terrain turns to dense jungles, mountains and islands, the main battle tank simply becomes unstuck. This is one of the reasons that the light tank's disadvantages to a medium tank in a head-on fight are often made redundant, as the light tank may be the most lethal fire support element in the area. Chances are, if one side is resorting to light tanks over medium tanks, it's quite possible the other side will be too for the same reasons. This does not mean that light tanks will never encounter main battle tanks, however, and they are built with this possibility in mind. The main gun on a light tank should be capable of penetrating a medium tank from side-on shots and a number of other angles where the armour is weaker. Much value was placed on these tanks, such as the Soviet PT-76 or the British Scorpion. But this changed. Nations have begun to abandon the idea of light tanks, focusing on medium tanks that are generally able to fit the bill required without the need for overcomplicated tank production to specifically suit every potential need. That is, until now. In 2018, the Chinese military was seen debuting its new light tank, the Type 15. The Type 15 boasts a 105mm rifled gun, a weight of 33 to 36 tonnes depending on armour package, and a top speed of 43 miles an hour. From what specifications are known, the Type 15 so far seems a capable asset for the PLA at face value, and a move that makes sense in China's current position. This tank would suit China's two key areas of potential conflict: the high altitude mountainous regions of their border with their rival nation India, where older T-72 variants would struggle due to the oxygen levels, and with potential operations if they would ever push westwards into the many islands of the Pacific, where a greater emphasis on being able to simply get a tank to the conflict zone and move it from one island to another becomes much more important. This has caused a retaliatory response from their other main rival, the United States. The release of this Type 15 was accompanied with an announcement of 500 models. Soon thereafter, the US announced its Mobile Protected Firepower project, with the goal of, you guessed it, 500 models. For decades, the US was in a position where its largest perceived rival was the USSR. However, following their collapse, the US and Chinese relations have now degraded to a point where China's invasion of US ally Taiwan is now considered one of their most likely flashpoints, turning the two nations to look to each other to predict who their next battle will be against. But why would these two nations be focusing more on a light tank than new medium tanks to outperform each other like the Soviets and Americans did? Well, this harps back to the previous points about terrain. America's experience in the Pacific theatre in World War II, as well as their experience in Vietnam, showed how light tanks were much better suited to the style of battle that would take place in that region, as well as the numerous island formations in the region favouring a tank that is easier to transport due to less weight to provide fire support to troops in combat. It seems clear that both the US and China see this as a priority, with this region now being a likely flashpoint for operations and basing their military production on its needs before they arrive. America's answer to the Type 15 was their Mobile Protected Firepower program, which resulted in the Griffin II being awarded victor against the BAE Systems AGS modernisation. The initial contract with General Dynamics is for 96 low-rate initial production vehicles, with a plan to make a total of 500 models. The Griffin is however in a strange situation in that the army can't tell if it actually wants to call it a light tank or not, despite it falling quite clearly under the designation of a light tank. This new tank, similarly to the Type 15, also rocks a rifled 105mm gun, the XM35, and boasts a weight of 38 tonnes. Further details are unfortunately still classified, partly because the vehicle is so new and because they got lucky that no War Thunder Forum members seem to have taken part in the project. This does mean that there is not nearly enough information to know which one of these two models is the better of the two yet, and comparing them is much harder at this point in time, but one thing's for sure, both the United States and China are going all in on light tanks. It seems that the light tank is here to stay, and with the onset of technologies such as blowout panels and active protection systems, the light tank may be one of the vehicles to benefit most from the onwards march of technology, enabling the loss of weight in armour to be less of a drawback than before. It turns the tide of the traditionally poor survivability of the light tank, but that is if they actually fit these systems to them, which so far we are indeed seeing blowout panels on both of these two models. So in the modern era, the light tank is still a good idea, and a useful asset to many militaries around the world. It's safe to say the light tank is back, and it seems to be here to stay. Thanks for watching guys. As always, if you want to see more of my videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you enjoyed this episode then like the video. There's a Patreon link in the description below for those who want to go above and beyond supporting the channel, as well as getting a sneak peek into how the channel is doing, as well as early release uploads before they hit YouTube. I've been Kubota, and I'll see you next time.